the issue does not lie in the clothing itself, but rather in the motivation behind wearing it.
Welcome to Prism of Torah with Rebbe Saf Aaron Prisman, engaging Divrei Torah, packed with stories and practical insights. Find us wherever you get your podcasts or at prismoftorah.org.
Shalom uvracha. As we know, our Parshas Bo, Gematria, the numerical value of Bo, Bet, and Aleph is 3, hinting to us that there's 3 more plagues to go, 3 makos in our Parsha. Right before the last Makkah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu reiterates, after it was said already 2 times to Moshe Rabbeinu, that the Jews should ensure to ask from the Egyptians silver, gold, and also clothing. Clothing is not mentioned in our Parsha in this instance, but it is mentioned in previous times. And the question begs itself, how can it be that the actual thing that saved Klal Yisrael, that through that they merited to be saved from Egypt, from Mitzrayim, that itself is what Hashem is asking them to take? And I'll explain. The Midrash tells us that there are 3 reasons why Bnei Yisrael were saved from Mitzrayim. Shelo shinu et levusham, they didn't change their clothing, meaning they stuck to the Jewish identity clothing, and also that they didn't change their names, which is also a certain Jewish identity, and also their speech. Lashon HaKodesh, they spoke to each other. So the question really begs itself, how can it be? How can it be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself is requesting them to take clothing when one of the merits for the redemption was maintaining their distinct Jewish attire? Are they not compromising their very identity that ensured their salvation? What's going on over here? So I heard myself from Rav Zev Lev Shlita an unbelievable insight. And he explains that the issue does not lie in the clothing itself, but rather in the motivation behind wearing it. I saw that some want to answer that indeed the clothing was not modest at all. And when HaKadosh Baruch Hu asked them to take this clothing, he meant take the clothing for the big people, which was very not modest, but for your little kids, it's good enough, so it's okay. But still, what's the motivation behind telling us to take clothing? Gold and silver I can understand, but why clothing and why that clothing? So Rav Zev Lev wants to answer the following, and he wants to say that intrinsically it could be, very well could be that their clothing were modest. A long time ago, many people were modest clothing, even people that were not religious or not Jewish. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was teaching us a lesson over here. The issue does not lie in the clothing itself, because intrinsically the clothing was okay, but rather in the motivation behind wearing it. Until this point, dressing in the Egyptians' garments while living amongst them would kind of scream out a desire to emulate their culture and their values and want to be like them, which is kind of screaming out, I'm not proud to be a Jew. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says soon there will not be Egyptians anymore, taking these garments to use later outside the context of Egypt, where we know they're not going to be Egyptians anymore. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to get rid of them. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that. That poses no risk anymore. Not only that, it itself teaches us a lesson. It's a critical principle being taught us, that actions that are technically permissible can still conflict with the spirit of the Torah if they are done for the wrong reasons. If they would have worn those clothes to be like the Egyptians, it could be there's no halacha that's wrong. They didn't do, technically speaking, something that is not allowed. But the spirit of being Jewish is lost out over here. True adherence to Torah encompasses not only halacha, but aligning one's intentions with the values of what the Torah represents. How true and important is this lesson in our modern life, in our day and age? The Torah demands more than just complying with technical rules. We have to use our minds, ensuring and consistently and continuously asking ourselves, are the choices we do, they might be okay, the dry actions we do, and what we bring into our house, the type of music we'll listen to, the type of clothes we wear, it could be that Allah, there's nothing wrong with that. But does this scream out the spirit of what being a Jew is all about? Or are we being negatively impacted by the spirit of what is outside in the Western culture? Rav Zev Lev shared an amazing story from a yeshiva high school of Torah Vadas. And it was during the time where the Beatles were everyone's role model, and that was in the air. All the Beatles songs, and everyone to be like them. 3 students in the yeshiva suddenly began growing their hair long. Obviously, by doing that, they were emulating the Beatles style. And that was the fashion then, so it was very difficult not to do that. When questioned by the Rosh Yeshiva, why do you have long hair? What is this? It's not our way to to get haircuts like this or not to get haircuts. However, they found ways to defend their decision. They said, what do you mean? A Nazir who's a holy Jew, he practices like that and ensures his hair is long. And the Rogatchover Rav also, he kept his hair long. He wanted to save his time, so he didn't want to get haircuts by that, and hence the result was long hair. The Rosh Yeshiva obviously saw right through them, through their arguments, and he insisted, of course they have to get haircuts if they want to continue to come to this yeshiva. And he said, it could be that you're right, that having long hair in certain areas of your head, halachically is permissible, even to wear tefillin shel rosh, that in certain areas is a problem, but it could be that you're right. And it could be that some people, like the Rogatchover Rav, on his level, decided not to get haircuts often because he wanted to save the time to learn Torah. However, even if it is permissible, it is obviously unclear to me your motivation is to initiate and to emulate the secular trend, which is exactly what this yeshiva does not represent. We are trying to create our own Tevas Noach, our Ark of Noach, to protect ourselves from the Western culture. Yeh Ratzon that we realize that the centric theme of Yiddishkeit is Torah values, and not only the halacha, the dry halacha, but the spirit of what lies beyond the halacha. Have a good Shabbos.
This concludes another episode of The Prism of Torah. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something valuable. If you did, please subscribe to the podcast and give a 5-star rating. You can also find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts or our own website, prismoftorah.com, where we have a full archive of all our past episodes. We would like to thank Yona Vefa for the recording equipment and Eli Podcast Productions for handling all our post-podcast productions. Join us next week for another enlightening conversation on The Prism of Torah.